All right, so now we have all of my selections made, and I'll just sort of scroll down. You can see all of the different selections I did make. I went ahead for now, and I also included the stage right and the stage left spacings of the columns. Also notice as I click on these things, you can see sort of a black mask of where that selection is. So you can really see all the different parts and pieces, and each thing is labeled. Now on the ribs, I went ahead and did all of those as separate pieces so that because they're curved and they're turned in different ways, I may want to treat those a little bit differently. So I went ahead and made those individual selections. And let's see what else. So there's a lot of those. And when we want to go back to our just standard look, we just got to go back and make sure we select the RGB channels here. And that is still red because that's still visible. I just click that little eyeball and makes that invisible. Now, one very helpful thing that I learned recently from a colleague is that if you are in the middle of any of these little let's call them viewports, these little windows that kind of give you a small preview of what your layer looks like or your channel looks like. This is also true for layers. But if you hold down your command key or control if you're on a PC and click in the middle, it will make that selection for you. So this is going to be a really quick way to go back and forth. Otherwise, you can go, let deselect that, you can go to your select menu, down to load selection, and then you just have to find the channel that you want. So there's two different ways to very quickly pick and choose which selections to make. Once I discovered you can do this, I find it a lot faster. So I can go back and forth between these two tabs here and make that, find the layer or the channel that I want to make active. Hold down the command key or the control key and click, and it will automatically make that saved selection active for you. So that's a very handy little trick that I found, or that I learned. Thank you, Richard. So right now, when I go back to here, this is highlighted red because it somehow has been put into the quick mask mode. We can turn that off. Oh, I just lied. Well, I didn't totally lie. This little button here is also a shortcut to get to a quick mask mode. We're going to talk about that shortly, but just because that was highlighted red, I didn't. If it ends up being highlighted red for you, I don't want you to panic. Just to get it to not be red, because generally speaking, for now, we don't want it to be red. We are going to just either click this, or you can hit as a shortcut on your keyboard the Q. So if I hit Q, and again, see that how that highlights that up. Basically, it has made the quick mask mode active. Hit Q again, and it is gone again. Okay. All right. So next, we're going to go about adding some color. And for this project, I'm actually going to show you a couple of different techniques that you may not use all of them. You may decide you really like one versus another, but I want to show you how we can add textures such as, for example, I've picked this stone texture image to use for parts of this, and there are underneath, if you look under your windows, depending on which workspace you're in, I've opened up the patterns tab here. And so the patterns is going to be another useful tool that we're going to use. And you can also, of course, use your paint brushes and actually paint in textures. If you have created brushes that you like, if you've learned how to make your own brush, I'm going to show you one more step for that as well when we do some curtains. And remember, under your brush settings, you can go in and change the settings for any one of your brushes. So sometimes that can be a little bit limiting. It can be hard to control them sometimes, and can get frustrating maybe. So we're going to do some alternatives to painting in there. But just keep in mind that painting is always an option. You can always mark in colors with the brushes, okay? All right, so I'm going to just start with the sort of outside going in. So I'm going to first select my theater frame here. Let me go back. So I don't want to actually click on the channel. I want to hold my command key and make the selection. Go back to my layers, again, hit Q a couple of times, and it resets that layer. So this background layer, we don't want to paint on this, so I'm going to make new layers. So essentially all these new selections are going to become new layers so that I can control them all individually. So to make a new layer, go up to Layer, New, and New Layer. Notice the shortcut for this is Shift. This is the Control command on a Mac, and then the letter N. So I will probably, as I get going, just use that shortcut more often than not. But until you learn that, until you have that memorized, it's under Layer, New, Layer. And I'm going to name that the theater. All right, so to see how that has been placed now in my layers, and now I can choose I'm going to just use the fill command for right now for this because I just want it to be a solid color. We're going to talk about how to make, add some textures and do some different things. So probably want this color. What is this? It's not quite black. It's kind of a light gray, more in the red range. That'll work. Let's just use that. And again, the fill command. Also, another shortcut, if you're using this fill command a lot, learn this shortcut, Shift and then function 5. That's a very useful shortcut to remember because, again, having to go back to all of these drop-down menus and find the thing and click on it and all of that, if you can do a shortcut, you're going to be in a much better shape. So fill, I want to fill it with my foreground color. And yeah, I'll just keep it 100% for now. So right now, I really just want to kind of go in some of these. I'm going to start with the borders and legs and the theater itself so that we can create our framework. So I filled that. And let's see, I need to go back to my channels. And now I want to select my, did I make that selection? I don't think I saved that selection quite yet. All right, so let me go back to my background layer using my magic wand tool. So in our theater space, the Koger Theater, these are the walls that sort of angle back and in real life have those wooden ribs on them. And so in order to differentiate those from sort of the background, I'm going to end up making those a slightly different color. But first, I need to save my selection. There we go. All right, so since it's more or less a wood color, I'm going to go ahead and find something in the brown range, perhaps. Again, my focus is going to be on the scene here, so I'm just using this to differentiate just a little bit from the outside walls here. So again, I'm going to make a new layer, and this is going to be called Proscenium. I do highly recommend naming your layers, something that you will remember, because when you start getting a whole bunch of layers over here, it's easier to find those things. So again, fill command. I'm going to use my foreground color again, and deselect, Command D or Control D. It's the quick shortcut for deselecting things. And there we go. All right, our curtains, our first set of legs and border are actually our grand drape. So for us, that means a red color. So I'm going to select these separately. What if I did it again? I'm going to select that. I want to hit my Command or Control button, click in the middle to make that selection active, and just hit the Q. And a new layer. This is going to be border 1. And for this, it's kind of a deep maroon color, a little closer to the red spectrum perhaps. That looks pretty good. I don't want to go too dark yet on these. I don't, so for example, the rest of these borders, I'm not going to go full on black, even though our curtains are technically black velour. But because of the nature of light and shadow, if I just went straight to a black velour color on here, it's going to be really hard to manipulate that later. So again, I've done the border number 1, so now I'm going to find legs number 1. And that selection, go back to my layers, create a new layer, legs number 1. Now it is going to be useful to keep the legs and borders separate from each other. You might be tempted, since these are going to be the same color, technically, you might be tempted to make that just one single layer. But because in the theater legs are hung on a different line set, typically, from each other, we're going to use these separate layers to create some effects on here to give some separation. So it's for now easier to keep them separate. All right, so I'm going to keep going and fill in the borders and legs. And again, I'm going to use more of a gray color, and each one's going to be on their own separate layer so I can keep them distinguished from each other. Okay, so we'll be back in a moment. Okay, so as you can see, I have added color for the legs and borders. I did go ahead and make each set a slightly different color, getting a little bit darker as we go upstage. Hopefully that will add to our distance effect, and having them be a little bit darker in the back is going to help us frame out that background a little bit more. This is a good opportunity to start talking about layer management. As you can see, I'm going to see if I can make that a little bit bigger. Doesn't look like I can. I could drag it out, but I don't really quite want to do that either. But as I scroll through here, you can start to see all of these different layers happening in here. Now you can also notice that my background layer, my line drawing here, is starting to be obscured by some of the selection choices that I made. So in order to make that visible again, I'm actually going to make a copy of this background layer, and then I'm just going to turn this background off. Just it's there, but I don't necessarily want to take a chance of altering it. I want to make sure that that background stays sort of pristine, if you will. It stays the line drawing. I know I have a tendency to forget what layer I'm on. I get excited about doing something, and then all of a sudden I have like 5 different things on a layer, and that makes it more difficult to edit later on. So I just like to keep that background just in case. But for now, I'm going to make a copy of that so that I can then move it into a different location. So in order to make a copy, you can just hit Control J, and it will make a background copy, or Command J on a Mac, Control J on your PC, and it will make that will make a copy of any layer you have selected on there. So we can see our background copy, and I'm going to rename this one line drawing just so I can remember what that is. And so that I can see my lines on top of all of these other parts, I'm going to drag it up to the top. So to move layers around in here, all you have to do is select on it, click and drag, and it put it back because I didn't have it set in a good spot. I'm going to put it there for the moment and scroll up. There we go. All right, so I put my line drawing on top, but it has obscured now all of my other work that I've done so far. So I'm just going to change the blend mode for this to multiply, and anywhere the white on that drawing has now essentially become transparent, and I am just left with the lines itself. So I can still use this line drawing as a selection tool So still works exactly the same way as my background layer did, but now it's up on top. And again, as you create new layers, depending on what you have selected, the new layer is always going to go on top of that new selection. So you'll have to manage the layers and the positions of them fairly often here, especially to be able to get different parts of this drawing on top of the other. So when we finish this column here, for example, we're going to have to make sure that it is higher in the hierarchy than this set of border and legs here, so that it shows up on top of that. Okay. So next thing, as far as managing layers, it is really simple to minimize however many things you have in here just by creating groups. So first thing I really need to do is go in and put my legs and borders together. So legs typically go behind the border, so I've got border 5 here, border 4, I'll go ahead and move up here. And border 3, border legs. And I'm just moving these up so they're sort of in the order that they would actually be in real life. So I've got border 1, legs 1, border 2, legs 2, border 3, legs 3, border 4. All right, and for right now, this is probably going to have to change just because I do have other parts sort of mingling in here. But just to show you how groups work and how it helps to manage your layer window over here, I'm going to select, so I've got this is the bottom one, and I'm going to go to the border, hold the shift key down, that's going to select all of those, and right click on it, and I'm going to create a group from layers. And we're going to call these legs and borders. And so you can see how it's created a little file drop down. So you just have to click that little caret, it opens it all up, and they're all selectable as individual layers. And then if you turn the little eyeball off by the group, it will turn off all of the visibility for all of those layers. So again, this might be a good, put the theater and the proscenium in a grouping, and then as you add other layers and effects on here, you can group those. So it does make it a little bit easier to find things if you have them grouped, especially as when you start to get, 20, 30 different layers going on in here.